My name is Sarah Johnson, and I never imagined that the company I proudly called my second home would betray me so coldly. I was 26 when I landed my dream job as a marketing specialist at a buzzing tech startup in downtown Seattle. It felt like my ticket to independence, my own apartment, new clothes, dinners with friends without counting every penny. I believed that hard work would always pay off, that loyalty would be rewarded. I was wrong. It all began on a Friday morning, payday. Like clockwork, I logged into my banking app before even brushing my teeth, eager to see my balance finally breathe after weeks of late nights and endless strategy meetings. But the screen stared back at me, empty, no salary, no sign of my sweat and hours turned into money. I blinked, refreshed, checked my email for any deposit notifications. Nothing. I told myself not to panic. Payroll glitches happen, right? So I shrugged it off and headed to work, hoping to get some answers. At my desk, I drafted a short, polite email to HR. Hi, Lisa. I just noticed my paycheck hasn't arrived. Is there an issue? Hours passed, but all I got back was an auto response. Due to a system update, some payments may be delayed. Thank you for your patience. Fine. 1 day late wouldn't ruin me. But then 1 day turned into 3. Then a full week. My rent was due in 4 days. My fridge held nothing but leftover takeout and expired milk. I could feel my throat tightening every time I checked my account, praying for a miracle deposit that never came. When I finally caught my manager, Mr. Anderson, in the hallway, he wouldn't even meet my eyes. Hey, Sarah, about my paycheck, I began, but he cut me off, eyes on his phone. Yeah, finance is sorting it. It's above my head. And then he was gone, leaving me standing there like I didn't even exist. That night, I stayed late, trying to drown my worry in work. As the office emptied, I overheard voices drifting from the break room. I crept closer, heart pounding. It was Mr. Anderson and our finance director whispering about reallocating budget and cutting expenses on low-level staff. My stomach dropped when I heard my name. They were talking about me, cutting expenses, by withholding my salary. I felt sick. Back at my apartment, I sat on my couch in the dark, replaying every moment. Every extra hour I'd poured in, the holidays I'd skipped, the weekends spent glued to my laptop, all so easily erased. My trust felt like it was burning inside my chest, turning to ash. I wanted to scream. I wanted to quit on the spot, but how could I? I needed this job to survive. If I walked away, I'd lose everything, and they knew it. The worst part wasn't even the money. It was the silence, the deliberate way they pretended I didn't exist, the way my manager avoided me like I was a problem he could sweep under a rug. My phone buzzed with texts from my landlord. Rent due by Friday or late fee applies. I stared at the message, rage and shame tangling up in my throat. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell my friends. I didn't want them to think I'd failed. But inside, something was changing. That cold, helpless pit in my stomach was turning into something fierce, a stubborn refusal to let them win. So I started fighting back, quietly, smartly. I dug through old pay stubs, emails, chat logs. I saved every vague response from HR, every dismissive shrug from Mr. Anderson. I documented everything, built my own little mountain of proof. I started reading up on labor laws at midnight, my eyes burning from the screen glow. I found online forums where people like me shared their horror stories and their victories. I realized I wasn't alone. I didn't have to be another silent victim. One night, I sat by my window, city lights flickering like tiny beacons of hope, and promised myself, they may have stolen my salary, but they won't steal my fight. This moment, this betrayal wouldn't break me. It would build me into someone stronger than they ever imagined. By Monday, I was done pretending to wait patiently. I put on my best blazer, looked at my reflection-tired eyes, but a steady stare, and headed to work with a plan. I wasn't going to stay quiet anymore, and if they thought they could steal from me and get away with it, they were about to find out exactly who they underestimated, because this was just the beginning. Walking into the office that Monday morning, I felt like I was wearing invisible armor. Maybe no one else could see it, but inside, every shred of self, doubt had hardened into resolve. I wasn't going to let Mr. Anderson or the company bury me under excuses anymore. If they wanted a quiet employee who'd accept being robbed blind, they'd picked the wrong woman. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop like any normal day. On the outside, I was the same Sarah, the diligent worker with the polite smile, but behind my screen, I became an investigator, a planner, and a quiet threat they didn't see coming. First, I gathered every scrap of evidence I could find. I dug through emails going back months, every promise of a raise, every performance review where Mr. Anderson praised my dedication. I highlighted my work achievements, the campaigns that brought in clients, the late night revisions that saved deals at the last second. I made copies of my time sheets, cross-checked my pay stubs, and marked every inconsistency. If they wanted to call me disposable, I'd make it impossible to ignore the truth I'd built piece by piece. But I knew evidence alone wouldn't be enough. This wasn't a fight I could win by storming into Mr. Anderson's office screaming about injustice. He'd twist my words, call me emotional, say I misunderstood, so I chose a different strategy, gather allies quietly, one by one. It started with Josh from the design team. I'd seen the worry on his face too when payday came and went with nothing to show for it. Over coffee in the break room, I tested the waters. Hey, did you get your paycheck on time this month? I asked casually, pretending it was small talk. His shoulders tensed immediately. No, he whispered, eyes darting around to make sure no one else heard. That was all I needed to know I wasn't alone. Over the next week, I spoke to more coworkers, careful not to draw attention. Small chats by the vending machine, lunchroom whispers. I learned I wasn't the only one being squeezed. Several junior staff members hadn't been paid on time either. Some had given up hope, too scared to speak out. Others were angry but felt powerless. One by one, I gathered their stories, their emails, their proof. Late at night in my tiny apartment, I sat cross-legged on my floor, surrounded by printouts and sticky notes. My walls turned into a timeline of lies, missed payments, broken promises, fake excuses. I wasn't just building my case anymore. I was building our case, but confronting Mr. Anderson directly would still be a mistake. He'd shut it down, bury it under corporate jargon, maybe even fire me for being disruptive. So I went around him. I found the contact for the company's legal department buried deep in the HR portal. I drafted an anonymous complaint, attaching files and dates, outlining every violation of labor law. I read it 10 times over before hitting send at 2 a.m., my hands trembling with the weight of what I'd just done. Each day after that, I waited for the fallout. I expected Mr. Anderson to storm over to my desk, demand to know who dared defy him, but instead, the office air turned thick with whispers. HR suddenly scheduled policy meetings. The finance team scrambled behind closed doors. Mr. Anderson looked more rattled each time he walked by me, like he could sense the walls closing in, but couldn't find where the cracks were forming. I didn't stop there. Quietly, I reached out to a local labor rights group I'd found online during one of my sleepless nights. They connected me to a pro bono lawyer who, for the first time, made me feel like I wasn't fighting shadows alone. She explained exactly what my rights were, how the company was violating state laws, and how to build an airtight case if they tried to retaliate. I documented everything, every sideways glance from Mr. Anderson, every vague check is coming, email, every meeting I wasn't invited to anymore. At work, I still smiled, still delivered my projects on time, still acted like nothing was wrong. But behind the scenes, I was a woman sharpening a blade they never thought I'd dare to carry. One evening, when most people had gone home, I stood by the big glass windows in the conference room, looking out at the city lights below. A part of me wondered what would happen if I lost, if my complaint disappeared into corporate silence, if they found a way to bury my voice under legal threats. But then I thought about my rent notice taped to my fridge, the unpaid bills stacked on my table, the exhausted faces of my coworkers who were too scared to speak. I whispered to my own reflection, not this time. They could ignore one voice. But they couldn't ignore 10. They couldn't ignore 20. And they couldn't ignore the truth when it was backed by proof and the law on my side. This fight wasn't loud, not yet, but it was alive, breathing in the shadows of their boardrooms, waiting for the right moment to roar. And the best part, they still didn't know it was me, the quiet girl in the marketing department, who stayed late and smiled at everyone. The same girl they thought they could cheat and break. They were about to find out who I really was. The day I decided to swing the first blow against Mr. Anderson, I felt like my heartbeat could shake the walls. It was a Tuesday, the kind of ordinary workday when people drag themselves from one meeting to another, half-ass leap on stale coffee. But inside me, nothing felt ordinary anymore. I'd spent weeks gathering proof, stitching together every lie they fed me into a story no one could deny. Now it was time to light the match. It started with an email. Simple, polite, but loaded like a grenade. I drafted it at my desk, my fingers trembling just enough that I had to keep wiping sweat off the keyboard. The subject line read, "Request for payment clarification, immediate attention required." I copied not just Mr. Anderson, but the entire HR department, our finance officer, and the masterstroke, the legal counsel I'd secretly contacted before. I attached my timesheets, contracts, salary slips, and clear notes showing exactly where they'd withheld my pay. My heart pounded as I hovered over send. One click, I told myself, one click to tear the mask off. My finger pressed down, and just like that, the secret fight became real. I watched the reactions unfold like a movie. Across the office, Mr. Anderson's phone pinged. I saw his eyes drop to the screen, then widen just slightly, a tiny crack in his smooth, confident mask. He looked up, caught my eye, and I swear, for the first time since this nightmare began, he looked afraid of me. The HR director, Miss Rivera, stepped out of her office 5 minutes later, the email open on her tablet. She avoided my gaze at first, but I saw her lips pressed into a thin line. She knew. They all knew this wasn't some confused employee whining over pen. This was a bulletproof record of every shady tactic they'd used to squeeze more out of me for less. By noon, the office buzzed like a kicked beehive. Whispers swirled around the break room and flickered across Slack messages. People started looking at me differently, not with pity, but with curiosity. Some were too scared to say a word. Others dropped quiet messages in my inbox. Is it true? They did this to me too. What can I do to help? But the real fight began when Mr. Anderson tried to corner me in his office. He called me in with that fake, sugary tone he'd always used when he needed me to work late or fix a crisis he'd made worse. This time I didn't smile. I stepped inside, shut the door, and waited for him to speak. "Sarah, this email, it's a big misunderstanding," he began, forcing a laugh that fell flat. "You know how busy payroll gets wires crossed, mistakes happen. You should have come to me first, privately. We're family here. Family," the word stung like acid. "Family doesn't starve you to fatten their own wallet." I looked him straight in the eye. "I did come to you, Mr. Anderson. 3 times, and each time you told me to wait. I waited long enough." He leaned back in his chair, the fake warmth melting away. "Be reasonable, Sarah. Stirring up trouble like this won't end well for you. You think HR or legal care about one employee whining about a late paycheck? Companies have policies, procedures." He thought he still held the power that I'd shrink back, apologize, beg for my job. But I didn't flinch. I reached into my bag and pulled out a manila folder, the same one I'd spent weeks stuffing with every piece of evidence I could find. I placed it on his desk and slid it toward him. "Open it," I said calmly. He did. Slowly, his eyes flicked over printouts of my emails, screenshots of his promises, financial statements showing the missing amounts, records from my lawyer outlining the wage theft laws he'd broken. For the first time since I'd known him, Mr. Anderson didn't have words ready on his tongue. His lips moved, but nothing came out. "Sarah," he finally rasped, "we can fix this. There's no need to make it ugly." "It's already ugly." I shot back. "I'm just showing everyone the truth." He tried to threaten me then softly, with veiled warnings about my future prospects and reputation in the industry. But each threat rolled off my back like rain on glass. I stood my ground, heart pounding but my voice steady. When I left his office, I didn't feel triumphant yet. I felt ready, Because this email, this confrontation was only the beginning, I knew Mr. Anderson would scramble to cover himself. Maybe he'd promise a partial payment to shut me up. Maybe he'd lean on HR to smooth things over. But the old Sarah, the quiet worker who swallowed her pride and nodded along, was gone. By that Friday, I received an official notice from HR. A review of my payment claim was underway. They tried to bury it in polite corporate speak, hoping I'd back down, but I didn't wait. I forwarded that notice to my lawyer, the labor rights group, and every coworker who'd whispered their own stories to me. I wanted them to see I wasn't backing down and that they didn't have to either. Each step I took made it harder for them to silence me, and the best part, the whispers were growing louder. People who'd been too scared to speak up began to stand behind me. We weren't just victims anymore, we were witnesses, we were proof, we were a storm building behind a locked door. As I walked out of the office that evening, the sunset washed the glass buildings in gold. For the first time in weeks, I let myself smile, not because I'd won yet, but because I'd finally made them see. They couldn't steal my voice the way they stole my paycheck. And this was just my first blow. The real reckoning was yet to come. Once I sent that first blow rippling through the office, something unexpected happened. The whispers that used to slip past me in the break room grew louder. I'd become the spark people were quietly waiting for, and suddenly, I wasn't standing alone anymore. Fear that once chained us to our cubicles turned into anger, and that anger became a bond no threat could break. It started with me from accounts. She caught me near the coffee machine a few days after the email blast. Her eyes darted around like we were being watched, and maybe we were. She handed me a folded note, her fingers trembling just a little. "Sarah, read it somewhere safe," she whispered before walking away, leaving her half-filled mug behind. In the bathroom stall, I unfolded her message. They did it to me too. They still owe me 3 weeks. If you fight, I fight. My chest tightened, a strange rush of relief and rage tangled together. I wasn't the only one robbed in plain sight. I wasn't the only one they thought too weak or desperate to resist. Next came Jamal from IT, then Olivia from Client Relations. One by one, they came to me quietly at lunch, in the hallway, over hushed late night texts. Their stories mirrored mine: late payments, broken promises, gaslighting meetings where HR told them to just be patient. While Anderson and his cronies pocketed bonuses worth more than our annual salaries combined. For years, we'd watched each other suffer in silence. Now we were collecting those silences, stitching them together into something loud enough to shake the glass towers they hid behind. I knew we couldn't just vent. Rage without a plan was nothing but noise, and noise gets ignored. So we formed a plan. Every evening, a handful of us would slip away to an old diner 2 blocks from the office. Greasy fries, cheap coffee, and our laptops glowing with evidence. We built a paper trail, gathered pay slips, contracts, unpaid overtime logs, emails full of hollow excuses. It wasn't easy. Fear lingered like a bad smell. Some nights, someone wouldn't show up, too scared, too tired, too convinced they'd get fired if Anderson caught a whiff of rebellion. But we'd reach out, remind them they weren't alone, that we'd cover for each other if one of us fell. I still remember the night the plan finally clicked into something bigger than all of us. It was nearly midnight, the diner almost empty except for us, and the hum of the neon sign flickering outside. Jamal looked up from his laptop, eyes rimmed red but burning with something fierce. He said, "Why stop with an email? Why not take it higher? News, labor board, social, make it public, make it shameful." A silence fell over the table, not out of doubt, but because we knew once we crossed that line, there was no going back. But we'd already come too far to hide. I spoke first. "If we do this, we do it right. We don't just get our money. We make sure they can't do this to anyone else again." Heads nodded, coffee cups clinked, our alliance was sealed. The next day, we moved like shadows at work, polite smiles, good mornings, fake laughter echoing through the open plan office while the real plan simmered under the surface. By day, we did our tasks, met our deadlines, played the part. By night, we turned into investigators and warriors, gathering more people who'd been cheated by Anderson's empire. Each new story made me burn hotter. There was the single mom who'd worked 2 jobs for months without pay until the next project came through. The intern promised a stipend that never appeared. The father of 3 who stayed silent because they threatened to restructure his department if he made trouble. Anderson thought he could break us with hush money and intimidation. What he didn't know was that each threat only poured gasoline on the fire. When we felt ready, we made our first coordinated move. We leaked an anonymous letter to a trusted local journalist, someone known for exposing corporate fraud. We attached our evidence, redacted names to protect those not ready to step into the spotlight. Within days, the reporter's reply landed in my inbox. "This story is big. They'll never see it coming." That night, our little group sat at the diner, exhausted but grinning like thieves who just cracked a safe wide open. We knew the storm would come. We knew Anderson would find out, and we knew he'd try to scare us back into the shadows, but we'd already lost too much to crawl back into the dark. Each time I looked around that sticky diner table, Mia's worried smile, Jamal's clenched jaw, Olivia's steady eyes, I saw people who'd been stepped on for too long. Now we were standing up, shoulder to shoulder. At work, Anderson's smiles grew strained, his jokes forced. He didn't know where the leaks were coming from, only that they were spreading like wildfire. HR tried to sniff us out with sudden check-ins, surprise desk visits, random policy meetings. We just smiled, nodded, and kept our secrets safe. The Alliance was no longer just a handful of scared employees. It was a movement, a rumor turned real, a threat they couldn't contain. And for the first time in my life, I felt what real power tasted like, the kind you earn when you stand up, when you link arms with the broken and make yourselves unbreakable. We were ready for the next strike, ready to watch the empire that stole from us start to crack, ready to show Anderson what happened when the people he thought were nothing turned out to be everything he should have feared. When I look back now, it almost feels unreal how fast the final strike unfolded. We'd spent weeks living double lives, working under the same flickering office lights that Anderson thought made him untouchable, all while weaving a net he wouldn't see until it wrapped around his throat. The news story dropped on a Thursday morning. I remember waking up before my alarm, phone buzzing non-stop on my nightstand. Jamal's message was the first one I opened. "It's live, front page. They can't bury it now." I sat up in bed, heart hammering. The headlines stared at me through sleep. Blurred eyes. Local CEO accused of withholding wages, manipulating contracts, and intimidating workers into silence. Under it, a picture of Anderson at some fancy ribbon, cutting smug smile frozen in place, now the face of corporate theft. It wasn't just words on a screen. It was our stolen nights at that diner, our whispered confessions, our evidence stitched together into a truth too big for Anderson to hide. The article had everything: testimonies from employees, documents showing cooked books, hidden bank transfers, fake invoices, the same tricks they'd used to siphon off our paychecks and fund their lavish bonuses. That morning, the office felt like a battlefield dressed up as a normal workday. The front desk buzzed with reporters trying to get statements, employees clustered in corners, reading the story on their phones, glancing nervously at the glass walls of Anderson's corner office. Anderson tried to do what men like him always do: deny, deflect, threaten. By noon, an emergency all-hands a meeting was called. We sat in rows of cheap chairs in the break room as he strode in, tie perfectly knotted, fake confidence pasted on his face. He cleared his throat, voice dripping with the same patronizing calm he'd used when he told me, "You're just being difficult, Sarah. This is all a misunderstanding," he said, voice booming through the room. "A smear campaign from a handful of disgruntled employees. We will investigate." I almost laughed. Investigate? We'd done the investigation for him. He just didn't like the verdict. He opened the floor for questions, expecting polite silence. Instead, Olivia raised her hand, voice steady as steel, when she asked, "So when are you paying us back? Or should we send the next batch of evidence to the State Labor Board too?" A gasp rippled through the room. Anderson's mask slipped just for a second, but it was enough. He sputtered, papers trembling in his hand, eyes darting from face to face. He looked small, cornered, exactly the way he'd made me feel that day in his office when he told me I didn't deserve my salary. When the meeting ended in chaos, we didn't stop. The alliance that started with secret notes now walked the halls openly. Mia drafted a formal complaint to the Department of Labor with all our names on it, no more aliases, no more secrets. Jamal took the tech evidence straight to the company's board of directors, bypassing Anderson's cronies. Olivia called every local news outlet that hadn't run the story yet and offered interviews, and I called a lawyer. It was risky. We knew Anderson had money, connections, people who'd do damage control for him if they could. But the story had grown too big. By the weekend, other ex-employees came forward, people we'd never met, people who'd left years ago with the same broken promises echoing in their bank accounts. It turned out we were just the latest in a long line of paychecks stolen and voices silenced. I remember standing in that diner again, this time with the TV on. The news anchor spoke our story back to us like it belonged to the whole world now. My phone buzzed with messages from strangers' thank yous, solidarity, some even offering jobs to people who'd been fired for speaking up. Anderson's face was everywhere, but this time it wasn't on the company's polished brochures. It was on headlines about lawsuits, labor fraud, breach of trust. His investors pulled out. The board suspended him pending investigation, which we all knew meant they were trying to save face before the company tanked. I dreamed of this moment the moment I'd stand outside that glass tower, looking up at the empire that thought it could bury my voice. And I'd watch it crack, floor by floor, lie by lie. But the best part wasn't just watching Anderson crumble. The best part was watching my people stand taller. The single mom got her unpaid wages plus damages. The interns found new jobs where they'd never be forced to work for free. Mia walked into HR with her back straight, demanding what she was owed and got it. As for me, I didn't just win my paycheck back. I won something bigger, my freedom. I took my severance and walked out those glass doors on my own terms. No threats, no intimidation. No manager leaning over my shoulder reminding me who held the power. Because the truth is they never did. They just counted on us believing they did. Now when people ask me what I do differently, I tell them this. Next time, I won't wait to fight. And if you ever find yourself standing alone in that break room, whispering your anger to the coffee machine, don't stay silent. Find your people, gather your proof, and when they tell you you're replaceable, remind them who really keeps the lights on around here.